The silver light hit the building before the warning did. One moment the Shadowborn Cultural Centre was full of life. Isabella painting, Sarah analysing samples, James counselling a newly discovered Shadowborn who'd shown up at their door 3 days ago, terrified, glowing, convinced she was dying. The next moment, every window exploded inward simultaneously. Not from explosion, not from impact, from pressure. Like reality itself had been squeezed. Elara was on her feet before the glass finished falling, her hands blazing gold, her body moving on pure instinct. Around her, 8 other Shadowborn erupted with light, the room filling with golden warmth against the cold silver that pressed through every crack in the walls. "What is that?" Isabella screamed, her paintings ripping from the walls, ancient symbols fluttering like panicked birds. Elara looked at the window, at the sky outside. Silver light, pulsing, descending. Not weather, not vampire magic. Something older. Something that made her power recoil like a hand pulled back from a hot flame. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She already knew the voice before she answered. "They're not coming in 6 months," the ancient, distorted voice said. "They're already here." Julian burst through the doors with Marcus and 4 vampire guards, his steel-grey eyes scanning the room, his massive frame moving with predatory urgency through the debris. "Everyone accounted for?" he demanded. "We're here," Katrina answered, pulling Isabella upright. What just happened? Silver light descended on the entire block. Julian crossed to Elara, his hands running over her arms, checking for injuries. Constantine is losing his mind upstairs. 3 of his guards are unconscious. Whatever hit this building hit the council floor too. "It wasn't an attack," Elara said quietly. Everyone looked at her. "It was a knock," she continued. "Whatever is out there, it could have leveled this building if it wanted to. It didn't. It just..." She looked at the broken windows, the shattered glass, the silver residue burning faintly on the windowsills. "It wanted us to know it arrived." "Well," Alexei said, checking the magazine of his weapon with the calm of a man who'd been expecting disaster his entire life. "Message received." Constantine swept into the room 30 seconds later, his dark, ancient robes catching the faint silver glow still drifting through the broken windows. His silver-white hair was loose, his cold, grey eyes sharper than Elara had ever seen them. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked genuinely afraid. "Gather everyone," he said. "Council chamber, now." "What do you know?" Julian asked. "Enough," Constantine replied. "Too much, and not nearly enough." He looked at Elara. "You received a call 6 weeks ago. A warning. 6 months." "They came early," Elara said. "They came immediately," Constantine corrected. 6 months was a courtesy, a window for you to surrender voluntarily. His ancient eyes swept the room. "The order doesn't give courtesy, which means whoever warned you, whoever made that call, bought you time against their own kind." "Someone in the order warned us?" Katrina asked sharply. "Someone with a conscience and a death wish," Constantine replied. "Come, there are things you need to know before they make contact, and they will make contact. Soon, on their terms, not ours." They moved through the building, Shadowborn and vampires together, the silver light still drifting outside like fog, like judgment, like something patient and inevitable pressing against the glass. In the elevator, James spoke quietly. "I can feel them." His hands were pressed flat against the metal wall, his power reaching outward the way it always did, sensing life, sensing energy. They feel like pressure, like standing at the bottom of a very deep ocean, and the ocean is looking back. How many? Alexei asked. James closed his eyes, opened them slowly. I can't count them. They feel like one thing with many bodies. He looked at Elara. They're not like vampires, not like us. It's like trying to count the separate parts of a storm. The elevator opened, and the council chamber fell silent as they entered. Because sitting in the center of the room, uninvited, unannounced, in chairs they had clearly placed themselves, were 3 figures. Robes the color of deep winter sky, faces that were ancient in a way that made Constantine look young, and eyes, silver eyes, burning with cold, absolute light. 1 woman, 2 men, all 3 watching the Shadowborn enter with expressions of complete, terrible calm. Dr. Elara Valen, the woman said. Her voice was like the call had been, distorted, layered, like multiple voices speaking from one throat. We appreciate you coming to us. It saves time. Elara stopped walking. Behind her, she felt Julian's hand find her back. Steady. Present. You're the Order, she said. We are the Covenant Keepers, the woman replied. The Order is what frightened people call us. We prefer accuracy. She gestured to the chairs around the council table. Sit, all of you. We have much to discuss, and very little patience for theatre. You shattered our windows, Katrina said coldly, not moving. That's theatre. The woman's silver eyes moved to Katrina. That was a diagnostic. We needed to measure your collective power output. Now we know. She paused. You're stronger than we anticipated. That complicates things. Sit down, Elara said quietly to the group. They sat. The Covenant Keeper woman folded her hands on the table. My name is Seraphine. I've been enforcing the Covenant since before your species existed, Dr. Valen. Before vampires. Before the recorded history your kind obsesses over. I was there when the first Shadowborn manifested. I was there when they nearly ended the world. And I was there when we decided to seal your bloodline away forever. Her silver eyes fixed on Elara without blinking. I am also, she added quietly, the one who called you 6 weeks ago. If you're already hooked, subscribe right now because this is about to go places nobody saw coming. Drop a comment. Do you think Seraphine is an enemy or an ally? Let's see your predictions. The silence that followed Seraphine's admission was total. You warned us, Elara said carefully. You're one of them, but you warned us. I warned you because what's coming requires your understanding, not your destruction. Seraphine's composure didn't crack. My colleagues disagree. They voted to erase the circle immediately upon confirmation of your awakening. I argued for disclosure first. How generous, Alexei said flatly. It is, actually, the second keeper, a tall man with a face like carved stone, said. My name is Aldrich. I voted for immediate termination. I was outvoted by Seraphine and abstained by Marin. He nodded at the third keeper, who had not yet spoken. Understand that my presence here is conditional. You have one conversation to convince me you shouldn't be erased. I suggest you use it wisely. We're not here to convince you of anything, Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. He was leaning forward, elbows on the table, steel-grey eyes locked on Aldrich. "We're here because you broke into our building. You want to talk? Talk. But understand, there are 9 Shadowborn in this room, and every vampire Constantine commands outside those doors. We're not sitting here as prisoners." Aldrich looked at Julian with something close to amusement. 800 years old, and still performing, he said. The heir of the Nightingale bloodline, bonded to a Shadowborn. You of all people should want to hear what we have to say, because you loving her, he looked at Elara, may be the thing that ends the world. The room went very still. Explain that, Elara said. Seraphine reached into her robes and placed something on the table. A stone tablet, small, ancient, covered in symbols. Elara recognized them instantly. Isabella made a sharp sound. Those are my symbols, the ones I paint, the ones I don't understand. You paint them because they're coded into your blood, Seraphine confirmed. Every Shadowborn carries fragments of the original language, the language of the First Covenant. She touched the tablet. This is the original, written 5,000 years ago, after the shattering. What shattering? Constantine asked. He was seated at the head of the table, his expression stripped of its usual calculation. Genuinely ignorant. That alone told Elara how old this went. The event your species erased from history because it was too terrible to record, Seraphine said. She looked around the table. 5,000 years ago, there were no vampires. There were no hierarchies. There were humans. And there were Shadowborn. And for 3,000 years, they coexisted, built civilizations. The Shadowborn were guides, healers, keepers of natural balance. That matches what little we know, Katrina said carefully. What you don't know, Seraphine continued, is what happened when a Shadowborn bonded with a human who carried a specific bloodline. A rare bloodline. One that appeared perhaps once in a generation. She paused. When those two bloodlines combined, Shadowborn and what we call the Catalyst bloodline, the resulting power wasn't amplified. It was transformed into something that couldn't be controlled. Something that consumed. What do you mean, consumed? Sarah asked, her scientist mind already tracking. The bonded pair became a singularity, like a star collapsing. All power, all energy, all life within range was pulled inward, converted. The first time it happened accidentally, it destroyed a city of 40,000 people. Every living thing within 30 miles simply... Seraphine's ancient face was expressionless. Stopped. The silence was absolute. The second time it happened, Seraphine continued, we stopped it before it completed, but not before it killed half a continent. The Bronze Age collapse, Constantine said slowly. Historians have never explained it. Multiple civilizations collapsing simultaneously. No war, no disease, no natural disaster. It was a Shadowborn singularity, Seraphine confirmed. Incomplete, interrupted, but enough. Elara's mouth was dry. And you sealed the Shadowborn bloodline because we couldn't risk a third occurrence, Seraphine said. So we worked with the Shadowborn leaders who survived, who understood what had happened. They agreed to a covenant. Their bloodline would be contained, reduced, hidden, kept below the threshold where bonding with a catalyst could trigger the singularity. They agreed to their own extinction, Katrina said, her voice hollow. They agreed to their own limitation, Seraphine corrected gently. There were supposed to be Shadowborn, dormant ones, powerless ones, living human lives without ever awakening. That was the agreement. She looked at Elara. You broke the agreement when you activated, when you bonded, when you performed the ritual and demonstrated full Shadowborn power to the vampire world. I didn't know, Elara said. We know. And the 9 of us awakening together increases the risk exponentially, Aldrich cut in. 9 active Shadowborn, 1 bonded to a vampire, the others gaining power rapidly. His silver eyes were cold. And somewhere in your circle, or connected to it, there is a catalyst bloodline. We've detected it. We don't know who carries it yet. But when the bond completes between a Shadowborn and that catalyst— Singularity, James said quietly. Again. Unless we stop it first, Aldrich said. The word stop hung in the air like a blade. What exactly, Julian said very carefully, does stop mean to you? Aldrich met his gaze. It means what it has always meant. Reseal the bloodline. Return the Shadowborn to dormancy. Or, he glanced at Elara, permanent containment of the awakened ones. You mean kill us, Elara said flatly. I mean prevent the end of the world, Aldrich replied. The semantics are yours. Elara looked at Seraphine. Is that why you warned me? To prepare me for this choice? Seraphine held her gaze for a long moment. I warned you, she said quietly, because there might be a third option. One my colleagues don't believe in. One I've been working on for 5,000 years. She touched the stone tablet. One that requires something no Shadowborn has ever been able to do. What? Elara asked. Consciously choose limitation, Seraphine said. Not extinction, not dormancy, but choice. Shadowborn who understand their full power and choose their own boundaries, who master the singularity risk rather than being mastered by it. Her silver eyes were almost warm. We sealed your bloodline because we didn't believe your ancestors capable of that choice. I've spent 5,000 years wondering if we were wrong. The third keeper, Marin, finally spoke. One sentence, soft as a confession. So have I. After the keepers withdrew to quarters Constantine provided, under heavy guard that everyone knew was mostly symbolic, the Shadowborn circle gathered privately. The cultural center. Isabella's paintings surrounding them, the symbols that suddenly meant so much more than they had an hour ago. One of us, Sarah said, pacing, or someone connected to us, carries a catalyst bloodline. And if they bond with one of us before we understand how to control it— Bronze Age collapse, round 3, Alexei finished. We need to know who, Katrina said. How? James asked. We can't exactly ask Seraphine. If we reveal we're looking, Aldrich will use it as justification for immediate containment, Elara finished. She pressed her fingers to her temples. We figure it out ourselves. Sarah, can your power help? Biological pattern recognition. Could you sense a catalyst bloodline? Sarah was already thinking.
Maybe. I've never tried to look for something that specific. But if the catalyst bloodline has a unique genetic marker— She looked at her hands, at the faint golden light she could summon at will now. Give me time. And blood samples from everyone in this building. Everyone? Marcus asked from the doorway, where he'd been listening. Everyone, Sarah confirmed. Vampire, Shadowborn, human staff. The catalyst could be anyone. This stays within the circle, Julian said firmly. Nobody tells Constantine until we know what we're dealing with. And nobody tells the keepers we're looking. Nods around the room. Then Isabella spoke. She'd been staring at her paintings since they returned, her 19-year-old face carrying an expression far older than her years. I know what this symbol means now, she said, pointing to a sequence on the wall. A sequence she'd painted 3 weeks ago without understanding it. I've been working on the translation since Seraphine showed us the tablet. The Covenant language and my ancestral symbols, they're the same language, just different dialects. She turned to face the group. This sequence says, the catalyst does not destroy. The catalyst completes. What was halved shall be whole. What was sealed shall open. The singularity is not an ending. It is a birth. Silence. That doesn't sound like a warning, James said slowly. No, Isabella agreed. It sounds like a prophecy. Elara stared at the symbols. Seraphim said the covenant was written with the consent of Shadowborn leaders. But what if not all of them consented? What if some of them wrote something else? A second message, hidden in the same language. A message for their descendants, Katrina breathed, her eyes moving across Isabella's paintings with new intensity. For us, when we woke up. That's why Isabella carries the genetic memory, Elara said, the pieces connecting rapidly in her mind. She's not just an archive. She's a letter, written 5,000 years ago by Shadowborn who knew their bloodline would survive, who knew we'd find each other, who wanted us to know the truth about the singularity before the Covenant Keepers could define it for us. Isabella was trembling slightly, the weight of what she was, what she'd always been, landing on her all at once. Elara crossed to her, taking her hands. Can you translate the rest? She asked gently. All of it. I've been trying, Isabella said, but it comes in fragments, like trying to remember a dream. She looked at the walls covered in gold and ancient symbols. I need help. Someone to sit with me while I work through it. To keep me grounded when the genetic memory pulls too hard. I'll stay, James said immediately, his calm steadiness filling the room. I'll keep you grounded. Good, Elara said. She looked around at her people, her family. Sarah finds the catalyst. Isabella translates the ancestor's message. Alexei, I need you watching the keepers. Every move, every conversation you can access. Already on it, he said. She looked at Julian. And us? He asked. We talked to Seraphine, Elara said. Alone, without Aldrich. She warned you once, Julian said. Can we trust her? No, Elara said honestly, but she's the only one in that group who believes there's a third option. And right now, a third option is all we have. They found Seraphine on the roof, standing in the silver light that followed her everywhere, looking out at Manhattan like someone who had watched cities rise and fall and rise again so many times the whole thing had become almost tedious. She heard them before they opened the door and spoke without turning. You want to know what I really believe, she said. Not the official Covenant position, what I actually think. Yes, Elara said. Seraphine was quiet for a moment. I think, she said finally,
that we made a terrible mistake 5,000 years ago. And I think we've been too proud to admit it for 5 millennia. She turned, her silver eyes finding Elara's gold-marked green ones. Your ancestors didn't cause the shattering because Shadowborn power is inherently catastrophic. They caused it because they didn't understand what they were, because they had no guidance, no knowledge of their own nature. She stepped closer. The singularity happened because a bonded pair panicked, lost control, and an unconscious, terrified Shadowborn with limitless power is exactly as dangerous as it sounds. But a conscious one, Elara pressed, is different, should be different. Seraphine's voice held something that might have been hope.
That's what I've believed for 5,000 years. That if a Shadowborn understood the singularity, knew it was coming, chose to engage it deliberately instead of being consumed by it, they could control it, Julian finished. They could transform it, Seraphine corrected. Not control. That's the wrong framework. You can't control the sun, but you can understand it, work with it. She looked at Elara. When you performed the truth wave in the council chamber, when you transformed the Red Claw vampires without destroying them, that wasn't control. That was understanding. Instinctive, untrained, but real. Her expression was almost reverent. I've been watching Shadowborn for 5,000 years, Dr. Valen. You are the first one I've seen do what you did. Why didn't you lead with this? Elara asked, instead of the threat. Because Aldrich was in the room, Seraphine said simply. And Aldrich is not wrong that the risk is real. If the catalyst bond completes before you're ready, the singularity. Yes. Then help us find the catalyst before it happens, Elara said. Help us understand what we're dealing with, not as a keeper enforcing a covenant, as someone who's been waiting 5,000 years to see if you are right. Seraphine studied her for a long moment. Then she reached into her robes and pulled out something else. Not a stone tablet this time, a small book. Handwritten, pages fragile as autumn leaves. This is everything I know about the singularity. What causes it? What triggers completion? What your ancestors tried to do before they lost control. She held it out. My colleagues don't know I have it. If Aldrich finds out I gave it to you, the vote goes back to 3, and I lose the abstention. You'd risk that? Julian asked. I've been risking it for 5,000 years, Seraphine said. One more gamble won't break me. Elara took the book. Comment right now. Do you trust Seraphine? Because I have a feeling things are about to get a lot more complicated. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when Sarah finds out who carries the catalyst bloodline. You will not see this coming. Sarah worked through the night. By morning, she had results. She called Elara to the lab, a converted room in the cultural center that smelled of reagents and cold coffee, and said nothing when Elara walked in, just pointed at the screen. Elara looked at the genetic analysis. Then she sat down slowly. Are you certain? She asked. I ran it 4 times, Sarah said. The catalyst bloodline marker is unique, completely unlike anything in standard human or vampire genetics. It's almost like Shadowborn, Elara said. Like the other half of Shadowborn, Sarah corrected. She pulled up a comparison. Look, Shadowborn DNA has a sequence that appears incomplete, like something was removed from it. And the catalyst bloodline has the corresponding sequence. They're literally 2 halves of the same original genetic code. She looked at Elara.
Whoever wrote the covenant didn't just seal the Shadowborn bloodline. They split it, divided one species into two pieces and scattered them through human populations, so they'd never find each other. Until they did, Elara said. Until they did, Sarah confirmed. And when a complete Shadowborn, someone who's fully awakened like you, bonds with someone carrying the missing half of that original code, the singularity is the two halves becoming whole, Elara whispered. Isabella's painted words. What was halved shall be whole. The ancestors knew, Sarah said. They weren't warning about danger. They were describing completion. The singularity isn't a weapon. It's a reunion. Then why did it destroy a city? Because they didn't know what was happening, Sarah said. Imagine a chemical reaction that releases enormous energy. In a contained environment with the right conditions. Productive, explosive but directed. But if it happens in the wrong conditions, with no preparation, no control, it destroys everything around it, Elara finished. We need to know who has the catalyst bloodline. Now, before I know who has it, Sarah said quietly. Elara looked at her. Sarah turned the screen to face her fully. A name, a DNA sample. Elara felt the air leave her lungs. How long? She asked. The marker would have been inactive, dormant, probably their entire life. Sarah's voice was careful, gentle. They wouldn't know, would have had no reason to suspect. But now that our collective power has been activated, it's waking up in them too, Elara said. She stood, moved to the door, stopped. Don't tell anyone else yet, she said without turning. I need to talk to them first. She walked down the corridor, knocked on a door. It opened. Julian stood there, reading Seraphine's book, his dark brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up, saw her face, put the book down immediately. What happened? He asked. Sarah found the catalyst, Elara said. She found who carries the bloodline. Who? Elara met his steel grey eyes. It's you, she whispered. Julian, it's you. The silence that followed was the longest of her life. Julian didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at her with those ancient eyes that had seen 800 years of the world turning, and for the first time since she'd known him, looked genuinely lost. That's not possible, he said. I'm vampire. The catalyst is human. The catalyst is the other half of Shadowborn, Elara said. The missing genetic sequence. Sarah thinks the original species, before the Covenant split it, might be what became both Shadowborn and the vampire bloodline. Julian, you're not just my fated mate. You're the genetic completion of what I am. She stepped inside. The singularity isn't Shadowborn plus human. It's Shadowborn plus their counterpart, and the counterpart became vampire. Julian sat down slowly. When we bonded, he said. When the light exploded. When your blood healed me in a way it shouldn't have been able to. We were already beginning it, Elara said. Unconsciously, incompletely. Every time we connect through the bond, every time I draw power from it, we're moving toward completion, Julian said. Yes, and completion means... I don't know, Elara said honestly. The ancestors called it a birth. Seraphine calls it a singularity. The Covenant Keepers call it a catastrophe. She took his hands. I think none of them fully understand what it actually is, not even Seraphine. But if we complete it without being ready, then we find out who's right, Elara said. The hard way. Julian looked at their joined hands, at the faint golden light that always shimmered at the points where their skin touched.
something he'd never questioned, something that had always felt like warmth. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Sarah estimates the catalyst bloodline in you is activating faster now that the circle is united. The collective power is triggering it. Could be days, could be weeks." Elara squeezed his hands. "We need Seraphine, the full truth, everything she knows about how to complete the singularity consciously." "And if Aldrich finds out we know?" Julian asked. "He votes for termination and we have a very different problem," Elara said grimly. A knock at the door. Katrina opened it without waiting. She looked at their faces and immediately knew something enormous had shifted. "Tell me," she said. Elara told her. Katrina listened without interrupting. When Elara finished, her mother was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes moving between her daughter and Julian with an expression that was equal parts terror and fierce maternal calculation. "The other Shadowborn," Katrina said finally. "The ones in Canada. The ones I told you about." "Yes?" Elara asked. "I think," Katrina paused, "I think I know why they stayed hidden, why they never awakened, why their power never activated." She looked at Elara. "I think whoever led that community understood about the catalyst and made a choice to keep everyone dormant, to honor the covenant, not because they were forced to, because they were afraid of exactly this." "Then they know more than we do," Julian said. "They know everything," Katrina confirmed. "The elder who led them when I was there, she was old, ancient. She spoke like someone who carried the full weight of Shadowborn history." "We need to go to Canada," Elara said. "Not yet," Katrina said. "First, we need Seraphine to know what you know, because if the singularity is activating between you and Julian, whether you act or not, then the timeline for everyone's decisions just got a lot shorter," Elara finished. She was already moving. They brought Seraphine, Katrina, and Alexei into Julian's quarters, the tightest circle of trust they had. Marin, the silent third keeper, requested to join. They let her. Something in her eyes reminded Elara of someone who'd been waiting a long time to say something. Seraphine received the news about Julian's catalyst bloodline with absolute stillness. Then she closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, they were brighter than before. 5,000 years, she said quietly. We sealed the Shadowborn bloodline. We scattered the catalyst through human populations. And somehow the universe put the last Shadowborn and the only awakened catalyst in the same rain-soaked alley in New York City. A sound that might have been a laugh escaped her. The Covenant never accounted for fate. Can the singularity be completed safely? Elara asked directly. I believe so, Seraphine said, if 3 conditions are met. She held up one finger. The Shadowborn must be at full conscious power, aware of every aspect of what they are. No hidden limitations, no unresolved fractures. She raised a second finger. The catalyst must understand and choose the completion, not react, not be overwhelmed. Choose. A third finger. And there must be anchors. What are anchors? Julian asked. Conscious witnesses who can hold the energy if it expands beyond the bonded pair. Channel it. Distribute it instead of letting it collapse inward. Seraphine looked at the others. The Shadowborn circle could be anchors. If they're prepared, if they understand what they're doing. That's what the binding is for, Isabella said from the doorway. Everyone turned. She stood there with James, her dark eyes bright, a rolled canvas under her arm. She hadn't been invited. She'd followed anyway. The binding symbol, she continued, stepping inside without apology. I finished the translation last night. James helped me hold on. She unrolled the canvas. It's not just a power-sharing network. It's an anchor lattice. Our ancestors designed it specifically for this, for when the singularity completed. The bonded pair at the center, the circle linked around them. The energy distributes through the lattice instead of imploding. She looked at Elara. They planned for this. They planned for you. Maren made a soft sound, like something releasing. Everyone looked at her. The silent keeper's silver eyes were wet. Not crying, not quite, but close. I was there, she said softly. At the shattering. I was young by our standards, barely 3,000 years old. Her voice was the quietest thing in the room. The Shadowborn who died in the shattering, the ones who lost control. They were my friends. I watched them try to stop it. I watched them fail. I voted for the Covenant because I was terrified. She looked at Isabella's painting. If they'd had this, if they'd known about the anchor lattice, her voice broke very slightly. We sealed your bloodline unnecessarily. We sealed it out of grief and fear, not reason. Maren, Aldrich's voice came from the doorway. He stood there. Nobody had heard him approach. His silver eyes moved around the room, taking in the painting, the assembled group, Seraphine's expression. You gave them the book, he said to Seraphine. I did, she replied calmly. And you are actively helping them complete the singularity. I'm actively helping them understand it. There's a difference. Aldrich looked at Julian, at the golden light that flickered faintly around his hands now, the catalyst bloodline awakening, responding to the proximity of the circle's combined power. If this goes wrong, Aldrich said quietly, if the singularity expands beyond this room, beyond this building, beyond this city, it won't, Elara said. You don't know that. I know that your way has failed for 5,000 years, Elara said, standing. You sealed the bloodline and we came back anyway. You scattered the catalyst and the universe put us in the same room anyway. You can spend another 5,000 years fighting what we are, or you can help us become it safely. She stepped toward him. You're not wrong that the risk is real. You're not wrong that this is enormous. But Maren just told you. You made the Covenant from grief, from fear, not from full knowledge. She held his gaze. Give us the chance your fear never gave our ancestors. Aldrich looked at her for a long, silent moment. Then he looked at Maren. Something passed between them. 5,000 years of partnership, of disagreement, of a shared, terrible memory. Maren gave him a small nod. Aldrich closed his eyes, opened them. What do you need? He asked. We're in the final stretch. Comment what you think happens when the singularity completes. Is it a catastrophe or a miracle? Subscribe right now because the ending of this story will change everything. They prepared for 3 days. Sarah ran every analysis she could. Alexei reinforced the cultural center structurally. James reached out through his power to every living thing in the surrounding blocks, feeling for disturbance, for warning. Constantine quietly evacuated the upper floors without announcing why. The hidden Shadowborn in Canada made contact on day 2. Not physically. Through the circle's binding, a ripple of power reaching them from thousands of miles away, tentative, questioning. Feeling the approaching singularity the way you feel a storm before you see clouds. Katrina reached back, reassured them, invited them. Their elder, a woman named Dara, whose voice through the binding felt like deep water and old wood, and the particular stillness of forests at midnight.
responded with 4 words. "We will hold vigil." They would be anchors too, distant ones, but present. On day 3, Isabella finished the full translation. She gathered the circle and read the final passage of the ancestral message aloud. Her voice was steady, though her hands shook. "To our children who wake when we are gone, to the ones who found each other against the world's effort to keep you apart. You carry what we could not finish. We were afraid. We were unprepared. We trusted the keepers more than we trusted ourselves. Do not make our mistake. The singularity is not destruction. It is completion. It is what we were before we were divided. When the 2 halves meet in full understanding, when the Shadowborn stands in her power and the Catalyst stands in his choice, what is born is not an ending. It is a beginning. Not just for your species, for all of them. Be ready. Be brave. Be whole." The room was completely silent. Then Elara looked at Julian. He looked back at her. 800 years in his eyes. Everything they'd been through. Everything they'd nearly lost. Everything ahead. "Ready?" she asked. "Terrified," he said honestly. "But ready." They stood in the center of the cultural center, surrounded by Isabella's paintings, by the ancient symbols covering every wall, by the history of a species that had survived everything the world threw at it. The circle formed around them, 8 Shadowborn, hands linked. The binding activated. The 3 Covenant Keepers stood at the room's perimeter, even Aldrich. Even him. Constantine and his vampires outside, a protective ring, understanding almost nothing of what was happening, but standing their ground anyway. And through the binding, from thousands of miles north, a warmth like firelight. The hidden community. Dara. 50 Shadowborn who had chosen dormancy for decades, now choosing to witness, to anchor, to hold. "We begin," Seraphine said quietly. Elara took Julian's hands. The moment they made full contact, the power moved. Not explosively, not like the night in the alley, not like the ritual, not like the truth wave. This was deeper than any of that. This was tectonic. This was the earth moving rather than the surface shaking. Golden light rose from Elara, not just her skin, her entire being. Every cell, every thought, every memory, every fear and choice and moment of love and loss radiating outward in visible, tangible light. And from Julian, not golden, something complementary, something that made the golden light stabilize, strengthen, find edges it didn't have alone. A silver warm radiance that was entirely his own. The Catalyst bloodline fully alive for the first time in 8 centuries. Where the 2 lights met, where Elara and Julian stood connected, something new appeared. Not an explosion, not a collapse. A harmonic, like 2 notes that sound separately, then sound together, and become a chord that neither could make alone. The circle held. Every Shadowborn blazing, the binding lattice absorbing and distributing, channeling the energy through the anchor network, exactly as Isabella's translation described. Katrina's decades of control holding the lattice steady. Sarah reading the biological patterns, monitoring. James feeling the life of the room, confirming nothing dying, everything intensifying. Alexei's molecular sensitivity confirming the building stayed solid. Isabella's ancestral knowledge guiding the shape of the energy. The hidden community in Canada blazed like a distant constellation. Present, holding. 50 dormant Shadowborn feeling the singularity complete, and something waking in all of them simultaneously. Not uncontrolled, not dangerous. Gently, like a window being opened in a room that had been sealed too long. And Elara felt everything. 5,000 years of split history. The full scope of what Shadowborn was supposed to be. The missing half of her own nature. Not just power, but understanding. Not just strength, but purpose. She felt Julian in it, not consumed, not overwhelmed. Himself, and fully present. The catalyst bloodline not dominating him, but completing him in the same way it completed her. She felt the circle, her family, her people. She felt Katrina, her mother, who had given up everything to protect a daughter she loved from a distance. Holding the lattice with everything she had, her decades of lonely precision finally in service of something larger than survival. The harmonic grew until it filled the room, then the building. Then Seraphine placed her hand against the wall. "Hold," she said to the circle. "Channel it inward. The lattice can carry it. Let it deepen, not expand." They held. The energy folded inward rather than outward, spiraling down into the core of the bond between Elara and Julian, concentrating not into destruction, but into density, into permanence. Then it settled, like a breath released after too long held. The light faded gradually, not extinguished, integrated, folded into the two of them, into the circle, into the distant Shadowborn community flickering warmly from the north. The room was quiet. Elara opened her eyes. Everything looked the same. The walls, the paintings, the people standing around her. But everything felt different. Like the air itself had shifted. Like the frequency of the world had moved one note and would never go back. Julian's hands were still in hers. He looked at her with those steel-grey eyes that she knew better than anything, and in them she saw something she'd never seen before. Not just love, not just the mate bond. Recognition. Like he was seeing his own reflection in a face that was entirely someone else's. "I understand," he said quietly. "What we are, what this was." "Me too," she said. Seraphine's voice broke the moment. It was barely a whisper. "It worked," she said. 5,000 years. And it worked. Aldrich stood against the wall. His silver eyes moved around the room. The intact walls, the breathing people, the city outside unchanged, unharmed. He looked at Elara. "The Covenant," he said slowly, "was built on an incomplete understanding of your nature." A pause that cost him something visible. "I will recommend its revision." Coming from Aldrich, it was an apology, an enormous one. "Thank you," Elara said. 1 week later, The Shadowborn Cultural Centre had new paintings on the walls. Not just Isabella's ancestral symbols, though those were still there, newly translated, newly understood. New ones, painted by Shadowborn who had been dormant for decades, now beginning to awaken carefully, with guidance, with community, with knowledge their ancestors never had. Dara arrived from Canada with 30 of her community. Not all of them. Some chose to remain dormant. Their right, honoured completely. But 30 came. 30 Shadowborn who had lived in careful silence for decades, stepping into a world that had changed while they waited. Dara herself was extraordinary. Tall, white-haired, her golden eyes the steady warmth of someone who has kept a flame alive in wind for a very long time. She embraced Katrina like they were returning to something interrupted too long ago. She looked at Elara for a long moment when they met. "Your ancestors would be proud," she said simply. Elara didn't trust her voice. She just nodded. Constantine formalized a historic agreement with the Covenant Keepers. The original covenant dissolved. A new one written, collaboratively. Shadowborn, vampires and keepers, equal parties. No more sealing. No more forced dormancy. Responsible awakening with the circle as guides. Aldrich signed it without ceremony, but he looked at Elara before he left the council chamber and said the last thing she expected. The 2 Shadowborn who died in the shattering, 5,000 years ago. He held her gaze. They were trying to do what you did. They just didn't know how. A pause. I'm glad someone finally showed them it was possible. He left without waiting for a response. That night, Elara stood on the roof with Julian, Manhattan glittering below them, the sky clear for the first time in weeks. No silver light, no pressure, no threat looming. Just the city. Just them. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Julian said, "we figure out what we are, together, without anyone telling us we're too dangerous to exist." He pulled her close. "You've spent your whole life not knowing what you were. Your mother spent hers hiding what she was. The community in Canada spent decades waiting to see if the world would ever be safe enough to be real in." He looked down at her. "It's safe now. We made it safe." "We got lucky," Elara said. "We were also good," he replied. "Both things can be true." She leaned into him. Below them, through the cultural centre windows, she could see golden light, the circle working, the new arrivals being welcomed. Isabella teaching symbol translation to 3 people who'd never known the language existed. Sarah explaining genetic heritage to a man in his 50s who thought his glowing skin was a medical condition. James laughing at something. A real laugh, the kind that fills a room. Katrina and Dara sitting together talking quietly, rebuilding a friendship interrupted by 2 decades of necessary hiding. Alexei running a self-defense class with the serious dedication of someone who understood that peace required preparation. A family. Improbable, complicated, scarred in places that would never fully heal. But real. Alive. Together. Elara's phone buzzed. Sarah. DNA analysis on the full circle complete. I found something. Not a threat. Something extraordinary. Tell you tomorrow. Elara smiled. There was always something else. There always would be. But for tonight, there was the city, and the quiet, and the man beside her who was the other half of what she was. Ready for whatever comes next? Julian asked. No, she said. She smiled. But I'm ready to face it. In northern Canada,
30 Shadowborn who came to witness the singularity began teaching the ones who stayed, passing down what they knew, what they'd kept alive in silence. In London, Paris, Tokyo, newly discovered Shadowborn felt something shift in the world, felt community where there had been isolation, felt possibility where there had been only fear. And in a small lab in the Shadowborn Cultural Center, Sarah Chen stared at a DNA analysis and understood something that would change everything again. The singularity hadn't just completed a bond, it had opened a door. Whatever was on the other side was waiting. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe because part 4 is coming, and Sarah's discovery will take everything you think you know about the Shadowborn and flip it completely. Comment below. Was the singularity a birth or something even bigger? And share this with someone who needs a story about surviving everything the world throws at you and becoming something extraordinary on the other side. The Shadowborn Circle isn't done yet. Neither are we.